January 13, 2022, 8 a.m. The morning began quietly in Oahu, Hawaii. Nestled on the northern shore of Pearl Harbor, this small community of just 40,000 residents was no stranger to peaceful days. The air was warm, the sky clear, and the streets were alive with the hum of a town slowly waking up. For most, it was an ordinary Thursday. But for one family, this day would change everything. In a clinic along Oahu Depot Street, life had come to a halt. Inside, behind locked doors and drawn blinds, a horrifying discovery awaited. Jon Tokuhara, a beloved acupuncturist, healer, and friend to many in this close-knit town, was dead. The events leading to his death were as brief as they were chilling. A man, dressed in a bucket hat, sunglasses, and 2 scarves, entered Jon's clinic. He stayed just 48 seconds. When he left, Jon lay lifeless on the floor, his body bearing the marks of a brutal and calculated attack. Despite a wealth of evidence, a surveillance camera capturing the fleeting moments of the killer's presence, shell casings left behind, and even the hat the assailant wore, this case would become a tangled web of conflicting stories, unspoken secrets, and a search for answers that seemed just out of reach. Who killed Jon Tokuhara? What could drive someone to end the life of a man who had dedicated himself to healing others? The answers would come slowly, pieced together through painstaking investigation. What began as a seemingly straightforward case, with clues pointing in one clear direction, would soon spiral into something far more complex. Jon's death revealed the cracks in relationships that once appeared unshakable. A doctor, a lover, and a husband, each played a role in a triangle of love, betrayal, and revenge. As the investigation unfolded, the lines blurred between victim and perpetrator, and the truth became harder to pin down. This is not just a story of a murder. It's a story of lives intersecting in unexpected ways, of passions boiling over, and of the thin veil that separates love from obsession. In the next hour, we'll unravel the events leading to Jon Tokuhara's death. We'll follow the investigators as they sift through evidence and question those closest to him. We'll uncover the hidden layers of this tragic tale and examine the lives shattered in its wake. Because in Oahu, Hawaii, on that fateful January morning, one man's life came to an end. But the story of what led to his final moments was only beginning. Jon Tokuhara was more than just an acupuncturist in Oahu, Hawaii, he was a cornerstone of the community. For nearly 2 decades, his clinic had been a place of healing and hope for countless residents. People came to him not just for relief from physical pain but for the genuine care he offered with every treatment. To those who knew him, Jon was a friend, a confidant, and, for his family, a cherished son and uncle. His mother, Lily, spoke of him with pride, always emphasizing the way he brought people together. His sister's children adored him, and he never missed an opportunity to be part of their milestones. Whether it was cheering from the sidelines at a school event or spending time with them at the beach, Jon was the fun-loving uncle they could always count on. The ocean was his second home. When he wasn't in the clinic, you'd often find him out fishing, surfing, or paddling. The waves brought him peace and perspective, a place where he could escape the demands of his busy practice. His life seemed idyllic on the surface, a man who had found balance between work, family, and his passions. But Jon's life had layers, some of which were less harmonious. Beneath his easy smile and reputation as a healer lay a more complex story. Jon was a man who valued connection, but sometimes, those connections crossed into territory that invited trouble. One such connection was with Joyce Thompson. What began as a professional relationship, helping Joyce through acupuncture treatments during her struggles with fertility, evolved into something far more personal. Jon was known for his charm, a quality that endeared him to many of his clients, but it also created complications. Joyce was not the first married woman Jon had become involved with, and this history wasn't entirely unknown to those close to him. While friends might whisper about his tendency to blur the lines between professional and personal, few would have anticipated the consequences these relationships could bring. With Joyce, the stakes were even higher. Her husband, Eric Thompson, was well regarded in the community, and their marriage appeared solid from the outside. But behind closed doors, the affair between Jon and Joyce had ignited tensions that couldn't remain hidden forever. Jon's private life, marked by moments of passion and risk, stood in sharp contrast to the stability he projected in his public persona. As a healer, he gave people relief and comfort, but his personal decisions would eventually lead to heartbreak and, ultimately, his tragic demise. Jon Tokuhara was a man of many dimensions, a beloved figure in Oahu whose life, and the secrets it held, would become the center of a story that rocked the community to its core. Eric Thompson was the kind of man many aspired to be. A successful contractor, he had built a thriving business through years of hard work and determination. In Oahu, he was well regarded not just for his professional accomplishments but for his role as a family man. Married to his high school sweetheart, Joyce, and raising a bright young daughter, Eric seemed to have everything: a beautiful $2 million home, a growing company, and a life that many in the community admired. He carried himself with quiet confidence, a man who valued the life he had created. Those close to him would describe Eric as someone who took his responsibilities seriously, whether at work or at home. But the man behind the image was not immune to the trials that test even the strongest of families. At the heart of Eric's world was Joyce. They had met as teenagers, growing up together and forging a bond that had carried them through life's ups and downs. Joyce was his partner in every sense of the word, a woman who had supported his ambitions while navigating challenges of her own. Joyce was warm, vibrant, and deeply committed to her family, but beneath her cheerful demeanor lay struggles that not everyone could see. She had faced heartbreaking challenges in her journey to motherhood. Infertility had taken its toll, leading her to seek help from Jon Tokuhara's clinic. His treatments, known for their precision and care, had given her hope when she needed it most. It was through these sessions that a deeper connection began to form. What started as professional appointments, focused on acupuncture treatments for fertility and back pain, soon gave way to something more personal. Joyce found herself drawn to Jon's charm, his ability to listen, and the sense of understanding he offered. For her, it was an escape from the pressures of maintaining a picture-perfect life. The affair unfolded quietly, hidden beneath layers of secrecy. The intensity of their relationship grew with each meeting, building on shared moments and whispered conversations. But secrets have a way of surfacing. Eric's discovery of the affair was both accidental and devastating. Reviewing security footage from their home, he saw Joyce sneaking out late at night. The evidence was undeniable, and when he confronted her, she confessed. What followed was a storm of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak. Yet Eric chose to fight for their marriage. Joyce, too, expressed remorse. She insisted the affair was a mistake and promised to recommit to their life together. In an effort to rebuild trust, they took significant steps to repair their relationship, including signing a postmarital agreement. The document outlined their shared commitment but also laid the groundwork for the future, should trust be broken again. For Eric, the postmarital agreement symbolized a new beginning, a way to ensure stability for their family. For Joyce, it was both a promise and a burden, a reminder of the cost of her actions. Yet, despite these efforts, the cracks in their relationship were not so easily repaired. The affair may have ended, but its shadow lingered, a quiet tension that neither could fully escape. As their lives returned to normal on the surface, deeper currents of emotion, resentment, regret, and suspicion, continued to stir beneath. The Thompsons' story was far from over, and the choices they had made, both past and present, would soon collide with devastating consequences. January 12, 2022, 5:20 p.m. The sun was beginning its descent over the quiet streets of Oahu as Eric Thompson's white Silverado pulled out of the driveway. The truck, well-kept and nondescript, blended easily into the flow of traffic. Eric had told his wife, Joyce, he was running errands. To anyone passing by, it would have seemed like another routine evening in the Thompson household. As the Silverado headed toward Oahu, its journey became a thread in a sequence of events that would soon unravel into tragedy. The truck was captured on multiple surveillance cameras, piecing together its route toward the small clinic Jon Tokuhara had called his second home. At 6:16 p.m., a figure emerged from a side street and approached the clinic's rear entrance. The individual was deliberately obscured, wearing a light-colored bucket hat, sunglasses, and scarves. They carried a brown shopping bag, their movements deliberate and calm. Moments later, the clinic door opened, and the figure stepped inside. 48 seconds later, they exited, leaving the door unlocked. In their haste, the bucket hat they had worn fell to the ground. Without a glance back, the person continued walking, disappearing from the camera's view. Inside the clinic, the scene left behind was devastating. Jon Tokuhara lay lifeless on the floor, a pool of blood forming beneath him. The violence of the attack was unmistakable, 4 gunshots, each delivered to his head with precision. By 6:45 p.m., Eric's Silverado was back in the driveway of his home. The gap between its departure and return was just over an hour, enough time for the events in Oahu to unfold. Neighbors' security cameras later captured something unusual that evening, a faint glow emanating from the Thompson backyard. It lasted only a few minutes, but it was clear something was burning. Later, the truck left the house a second time. This time, the bed of the Silverado wasn't empty. A large toolbox, typically used for storing construction tools, was visible. When Eric returned, the box was still there. The sequence of these movements would raise more questions than answers. Why did Eric's timeline align so closely with the events at the clinic? What was burning in the backyard? And what was in the toolbox that seemed important enough to transport twice? As investigators pieced together the events of the evening, each clue pointed to a web of actions that seemed too coincidental to ignore. But in a case filled with such precise movements and hidden intentions, proving the truth would be far more complicated than uncovering it. January 13, 2022, 8 a.m. The morning air was calm as Lily Tokuhara pulled into the parking lot of her son's acupuncture clinic. She had cooked him dinner the previous evening, but Jon never arrived to pick it up, a rare occurrence that left her uneasy. As she approached the building, her eyes fell on his white Tacoma parked outside, exactly where it had been the night before. The clinic's back door was slightly ajar, an unusual sight that tightened the knot of worry in Lily's chest. Stepping inside, she called out for Jon, her voice echoing in the quiet space. There was no response. Moving further into the office, her worst fears were confirmed. Jon lay motionless on the floor of his treatment room. Blood pooled around his head, a stark and horrific contrast to the neatly arranged clinic he had built with care. Her cries for help filled the air as she fumbled to call 911, the shock of the scene overwhelming her. The responding officers arrived quickly. Officer John Minter of the Honolulu Police Department was the first to step into the clinic. His trained eyes took in the details immediately, a spent .22 caliber shell casing glinting on the floor, the pristine stack of $4,000 in cash untouched on Jon's desk, and the unlocked back door that hinted at a hurried exit. The office, once a sanctuary for healing, now felt cold and eerie. Framed certificates on the walls and neatly arranged acupuncture tools stood as reminders of the life Jon had devoted to helping others. The stark contrast between the space's peaceful purpose and the violence that had taken place within it was unsettling. As the crime scene team processed the area, more evidence came to light. 2 additional shell casings were discovered, one hidden beneath Jon's body and another near the refrigerator. The positioning suggested a precise and deliberate attack. The autopsy findings would confirm what the scene already hinted at: Jon had been executed. 4 gunshots to the head, all delivered with chilling accuracy. This was no random act of violence, it was personal, calculated, and fueled by deep emotion. Yet, for all the brutality, there was an unsettling restraint. The cash remained untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. Whoever had committed this crime had come for one reason only: to end Jon's life. Investigators quickly turned their attention to the clues left behind. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses captured a figure entering the clinic at 6:16 p.m. the previous evening, only to leave 48 seconds later. A bucket hat, discarded by the suspect, had fallen to the ground just outside the clinic. The Honolulu Police Department faced an immediate challenge. The evidence at the scene provided more questions than answers. Who was the figure on the surveillance footage? Why was Jon targeted? And what role did the cash, untouched and conspicuous, play in this dark puzzle? As the investigation began, it became clear that Jon's death was more than an isolated act of violence. It was the tragic culmination of secrets, betrayal, and a plan executed with chilling precision. The investigation into Jon Tokuhara's murder began with urgency but quickly unraveled into a web of uncertainties. For detectives, the key to unlocking the mystery seemed to lie in the bucket hat left behind by the suspect, a detail captured on surveillance footage as the figure exited the clinic. This hat, however, would become a cornerstone of the case's complexity. Shortly after the suspect left the scene, a homeless man stumbled upon the discarded item and took it with him. Initially unaware of its significance, he admitted to briefly wearing the hat before hanging it in his tent. When law enforcement located the man and recovered the hat, forensic analysts worked meticulously to extract potential evidence. Fibers, a single strand of hair, and swabs from the inside of the hat yielded DNA traces. Yet, the results were far from definitive. The DNA analysis revealed mixed samples, introducing uncertainty. Eric Thompson, the primary suspect, could not be excluded as a contributor, but neither could investigators conclusively tie him to the scene through this evidence alone. The bucket hat, which seemed like a promising lead, became a symbol of the challenges the investigation faced. The chain of custody was compromised, and the mixed DNA added a layer of ambiguity that made it difficult to solidify any connection to the crime. Surveillance footage, too, presented its own set of problems. While the cameras provided crucial glimpses of the suspect's movements and the white Silverado in the area, inconsistencies in timestamps and gaps in coverage created obstacles. The vehicle's route could not be tracked in an unbroken sequence, leaving detectives to piece together fragments of the suspect's journey. Eric Thompson, meanwhile, maintained his innocence. When questioned about his movements on the night of the murder, he presented a straightforward alibi. He claimed he had left home to dump construction materials, a small load of bricks, at a local convenience center before returning home. Yet, this alibi lacked corroboration. The security guard working at the dump that evening testified that he didn't recall seeing Eric or his vehicle. Moreover, Eric's account was undermined by key details. Surveillance footage showed an empty truck bed when he left home, contradicting his claim of carrying materials. Adding to the intrigue were events back at the Thompson residence. Later that evening, neighbors noticed a faint glow in the backyard, a fire that burned for just a few minutes. Investigators later found burn marks on a bucket and wheelbarrow at the scene, further fueling speculation. Eric, when asked about the fire, dismissed it as nothing more than tiki torches lit for ambience, a routine practice when spending time outdoors with his daughter. Forensic analysis of Eric's home revealed a cache of registered firearms, along with 2 unregistered guns. Investigators zeroed in on the possibility of a .22 caliber weapon matching the shell casings found at the clinic. However, none of the firearms collected were identified as the murder weapon. Detectives also uncovered over 1,000 rounds of .22 caliber ammunition in the home, suggesting familiarity with the type of firearm used in the crime. Yet, without the weapon itself, this evidence remained circumstantial. The white Silverado, captured in the grainy surveillance footage, was another critical piece of the puzzle. Investigators narrowed their search to a handful of vehicles matching its description, eventually identifying Eric's truck as a likely match. Still, the gaps in video evidence left room for doubt, and Eric's insistence that the truck seen near the clinic was not his added another layer of uncertainty. The investigation was at a crossroads. Each piece of evidence seemed promising on its own but fell short of conclusively tying Eric Thompson to Jon Tokuhara's murder. The bucket hat, the surveillance footage, the burn marks in the backyard, all pointed toward a narrative, but none could stand alone as proof. As investigators pressed forward, they were left with more questions than answers. Was Eric Thompson the man captured in the footage, or was there another explanation for the events of that night? The path to the truth remained obscured, leaving the community of Oahu, and Jon Tokuhara's grieving family, waiting for justice. The courtroom was packed with tension as the trial of Eric Thompson began. For the prosecution, the case against Eric was clear: a husband, consumed by betrayal and humiliation, had sought to restore his fractured life by ending the man who had shattered it. The cornerstone of their argument was the affair between Joyce Thompson and Jon Tokuhara. Using social media evidence, the prosecution detailed how Eric had discovered explicit messages, photos, and videos exchanged between his wife and Jon. These weren't just fleeting exchanges, they painted a picture of an intense, ongoing relationship. Instagram messages revealed declarations of affection and rendezvous that went far beyond professional boundaries. Eric's discovery of the affair, they argued, ignited a storm of emotions: anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming need to reclaim control over his life. The prosecution framed him as a man who valued perfection and success in every aspect of his life. His wife's infidelity, laid bare through the digital trail of messages, wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a public humiliation. To bolster their narrative, prosecutors highlighted the methodical nature of the crime. They pointed to the 4 gunshots to Jon's head. The timeline of Eric's movements on the night of the murder, his white Silverado spotted on surveillance cameras near the clinic, the mysterious fire in his backyard, and the toolbox in his truck, was presented as a chain of actions that pointed directly to him. This was not a random act of violence, the prosecution argued. It was the calculated decision of a man determined to erase the source of his pain and rebuild his life, no matter the cost. But the defense painted a very different picture. For them, the case was anything but clear-cut. They began by challenging the portrayal of Jon Tokuhara as an innocent victim. The defense introduced testimony and evidence that suggested Jon had a history of inappropriate relationships, many of which involved married women. They presented messages and witness accounts that revealed Jon's repeated entanglements with clients, framing him as a man who often crossed professional and ethical boundaries. To add further doubt, the defense raised the issue of Jon's alleged gambling activities. They pointed to the $4,000 in cash found at the crime scene, questioning why such a large amount was present and suggesting it could be linked to illegal gambling rather than the crime itself. By introducing this context, the defense aimed to expand the pool of potential suspects. Jon Tokuhara's personal life wasn't without controversy, they argued. Others had reasons to feel wronged or betrayed, and those reasons cannot be ignored. The bucket hat became another focal point of the defense's strategy. The DNA analysis, while suggesting Eric couldn't be excluded as a contributor, also didn't conclusively tie him to the crime. The chain of custody, the homeless man who briefly wore the hat, further complicated its reliability. Then came the surveillance footage. The defense meticulously dissected the gaps and inconsistencies in the video timeline. They questioned whether the Silverado seen near the clinic was definitively Eric's truck, pointing out discrepancies in the timestamps and emphasizing that the footage left room for doubt. Eric's own testimony, while risky, became a centerpiece of the defense. He admitted to discovering the affair and feeling betrayed but maintained that he had chosen to move forward for the sake of his family. He described the steps he and Joyce had taken to rebuild trust, including the postmarital agreement. "I was hurt, yes," Eric told the court. "But I chose to forgive her, to focus on my family. I had no reason to go after Jon. He was no longer a factor in our lives." The defense also attacked the prosecution's timeline of events, challenging the idea that Eric had enough time to commit the crime and return home unnoticed. They argued that the timeline relied too heavily on assumptions and lacked definitive proof. As the trial progressed, the jury was left to weigh two competing narratives. The prosecution's portrayal of Eric as a controlling husband driven to violence by humiliation, and the defense's assertion that the evidence was circumstantial at best, pointing instead to a victim with a troubled personal life and other potential enemies. The courtroom was rife with tension as each side presented its case. But the longer the trial went on, the clearer it became that this would not be an open-and-shut decision. The trial of Eric Thompson continued with a wave of testimony that painted Jon Tokuhara in a different light, one that challenged the narrative of a beloved community figure whose life was senselessly taken. The defense called upon individuals from Jon's past, men who had experienced firsthand the fallout of his boundary-crossing relationships. Among them was John DeMarco, a reserved yet visibly bitter witness, who testified about the affair that had ended his marriage. His ex-wife, a former acupuncture client of Jon's, had grown close to him during her treatments. DeMarco described how their connection evolved into a full-blown affair, one that he only discovered through a series of secretive text messages and unexplained absences. "My wife was under his care," DeMarco said, his voice tinged with resentment. "I trusted him as her doctor, but he crossed the line. That trust destroyed my marriage." DeMarco went on to recount how the affair led to their divorce, a painful and public unraveling of their family. Despite his anger at the time, he admitted to moving on, even remarrying. When asked if he held any ill will toward Jon, his answer was curt but pointed: "I let it go. What happened was between her and me. Jon wasn't worth my energy after that." Another testimony came from Daryl Fewett, a man who, like DeMarco, had seen his marriage disintegrate because of Jon's actions. Fewett was more animated on the stand, openly expressing his frustration over being dragged into the trial as a potential suspect. "My wife had an affair with him, too," Fewett stated bluntly. "But that was years ago. I was angry, sure, but I moved on. I rebuilt my life. I didn't kill anyone." The defense emphasized Fewett's initial involvement in the investigation, noting that he had deleted data from his phone before speaking with police. Though Fewett maintained his innocence, the defense used his testimony to suggest a broader pool of individuals who may have had motives to harm Jon. Through these accounts, the defense built a narrative that Jon Tokuhara's personal life was far more complex than the prosecution had portrayed. These testimonies painted Jon as a man who had, on more than one occasion, become entangled in relationships that left others deeply hurt. For Eric Thompson's defense team, these witnesses were crucial in their effort to deflect attention from their client. They argued that Jon's history of affairs created a pattern of behavior that made him vulnerable to retaliation from other wronged individuals. In cross-examination, the prosecution attempted to downplay these testimonies, emphasizing that neither DeMarco nor Fewett had been linked to Jon's murder in any tangible way. They pointed out that both men had alibis and that their anger toward Jon had subsided long before his death. But for the jury, the testimonies added a layer of complexity to an already intricate case. They introduced the possibility that Jon's death could have been the result of lingering resentment or unresolved conflicts from his past relationships. The courtroom drama intensified as the defense used these accounts to challenge the prosecution's narrative. Was Eric Thompson truly the only person with motive and opportunity? Or had Jon's complicated personal life created enemies beyond what the investigators had considered? As the trial progressed, the jury was left to navigate these conflicting stories, of a man who had inspired admiration and anger in equal measure and a husband accused of crossing the ultimate line in the name of betrayal and redemption. The jury deliberated for 3 days, poring over every detail of the evidence, every word of the testimonies, and every nuance of the arguments presented. When they returned to the courtroom, their decision was far from what anyone had expected. They were deadlocked. 9 jurors voted for conviction, persuaded by the prosecution's narrative of a betrayed husband driven to violence. They saw the affair, the surveillance footage, and the timeline as pieces of a puzzle that pointed undeniably to Eric Thompson. But 3 jurors held out, unconvinced. For them, the gaps in the evidence, the inconclusive DNA on the bucket hat, the lack of the murder weapon, and the ambiguities in the timeline, were too significant to ignore. Judge Paul Wong declared a mistrial, and the courtroom erupted into a mix of frustration and relief. For Jon Tokuhara's family, the outcome was a bitter blow. They had hoped for closure, a definitive answer to the question of who had taken their beloved son and brother from them. Instead, they were left with more uncertainty and an overwhelming sense of injustice. For Eric Thompson and his defense team, the mistrial offered a reprieve but no resolution. The shadow of accusation remained, hanging over Eric and his family like a cloud. Joyce Thompson, already at the center of a storm of controversy, faced renewed scrutiny from a community divided over her role in the events that had unfolded. The mistrial sent shockwaves through the small town of Oahu. Residents, once united in their grief over Jon's death, found themselves split. Some were convinced of Eric's guilt, viewing him as a man who had let jealousy and pride drive him to an unthinkable act. Others questioned the strength of the evidence, wondering if the real perpetrator had yet to be identified. For the Tokuhara family, life in Oahu would never be the same. Jon had been a pillar of the community, a man whose presence brought healing and comfort to so many. His absence left a void, and the lack of justice only deepened the pain. The Thompson family, too, felt the weight of the trial's outcome. Eric's reputation, once untarnished, was now a subject of whispers and speculation. Joyce, whose affair had set the events in motion, faced judgment not only for her infidelity but for the chain reaction it had triggered. The case left more questions than answers, lingering in the minds of all who followed it. Was Eric truly the person captured on the surveillance footage, or was someone else wearing that bucket hat? What was the significance of the cash found at the crime scene? And if Eric didn't commit the murder, who did, and why? As the courtroom emptied and the community returned to their daily lives, one thing remained certain: the story of Jon Tokuhara's death was far from over. The search for justice, the lingering doubts, and the lives forever changed would continue to ripple through Oahu, a reminder that some truths remain elusive, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Following the mistrial in August 2023, the case against Eric Thompson was scheduled for a retrial on October 16, 2023. However, as of December 8, 2024, there have been no publicly available updates regarding the proceedings or outcomes of this second trial. The lack of information leaves the current status of the case unclear, with the community and those involved awaiting further developments. Eric Thompson remains under house arrest after posting a $1 million bail. Following the mistrial in August 2023. As the case of Jon Tokuhara's tragic death lingers in the minds of many, the questions surrounding it remain haunting. Did the killer outsmart detectives? How could someone leave behind so many clues, DNA on a bucket hat, surveillance footage of a vehicle, and yet evade definitive identification? Why has justice remained elusive? Was the mistrial a product of reasonable doubt, or does it hint at the complexities of a case where emotion and evidence collide? And as we wait for updates on the second court hearing, one question looms larger than ever: if not Eric Thompson, then who? This story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about love and betrayal. How far will someone go to protect what they hold dear? For some, love turns to obsession; for others, betrayal ignites rage. At what point does the line between victim and perpetrator blur? For the Tokuhara family, the pain of loss is compounded by the lack of closure. For the Thompson family, their lives remain overshadowed by accusations and suspicion. And for the community of Oahu, the case has left a scar, reminding everyone how quickly life can unravel when trust is broken. Jon Tokuhara's legacy as a healer and a friend should not be forgotten, even as his life became entwined in controversy. His death, a senseless act of violence, continues to demand answers. Justice may still be out of reach, but his story remains a cautionary tale of human relationships and their fragile boundaries. The search for truth persists, and until it is found, the questions will linger: what really happened in that clinic on January 12, 2022? Who is responsible for ending Jon Tokuhara's life, and why? If you found this story as compelling as we have, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into true crime. Let's continue seeking the truth, together. Thank you for watching. To be continued.